should go through life forgiving everyone, right? That's kind of the world's view. But in Scripture, we find that this is actually, excuse me, I actually had a donut this morning. And I don't eat sugar in the morning normally. No, I'm doing good. I don't normally eat sugar in the morning because it gums up my throat, right? So, but I did this morning. It was an apple fritter, and it was good. So, so when we talked about forgiveness, we noticed that this is an awesome power that we have. That Christians have a unique power in forgiveness that no one else in the world has, and that is when we forgive someone in this world, God counts it as being forgiven in the place of judgment, right? So we have this awesome power, and we have a responsibility to forgive, because if we don't forgive one another from the heart, then we're in danger of God saying, well, then I don't also forgive you, right? That there's this forgiveness is not just some little thought we have, some way to set ourselves free from feeling bitter about things, but it is in fact a legal transaction whereby we set another soul free, another person is set free from the sin that they have given us or sinned against us. And we also remember that sometimes it is inappropriate to forgive. That's a very hard thing to think about. But even God had his limits, and he said, anybody who sins against the Holy Spirit, there is no forgiveness for that. And we cannot forgive on someone else's behalf. We can only forgive on behalf of the sins that were committed against us. If someone committed a sin against you, I cannot forgive it. I cannot absolve them of guilt. I can in no way relieve their responsibility because the sin was not against me. We also learned that the ultimate, in the end, all sins are against God, right? So that's a quick outline of some of the things that we came to under forgiveness. And that sets the stage for this little conversation that Jesus has with someone named Simon. And here's that conversation, right? And let me set up the conversation for you so you can remember how the conversation started. Jesus is invited into the house of Simon, a wealthy, righteous or self-righteous Jewish man. And as they're sitting at dinner, a woman comes in, and she immediately begins to weep over Jesus and to anoint his feet and wash them. And Simon says within his heart, he says, this man must not be the prophet everybody thinks he is. Now I'm paraphrasing, but this is essentially what he's saying. This man must not be the prophet everybody thinks he is. And here's how I know that. Because if this man really was the prophet that everybody thinks he is, he would not let a woman like that touch him. So he must not know what kind of a woman that is, or he wouldn't let her touch him. And then this conversation happens, which is, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. Well, okay, say it, right? All right, and he sets this scenario up, and it's a pretty easy scenario, right? There was a certain man, in fact, creditor, who had two debtors. Now, I just want you to think of this scenario, right? This isn't just a king. This just isn't somebody who happens to be a householder. This is a creditor. What does that tell you about him? Anybody know? When you say this is a creditor, say it again. Someone that loans money, which means it's somebody who makes a living loaning money, right? This is somebody who's expecting a return on this. It's not just, hey, your brother borrowed $20 from you, or $200 or $2,000 or whatever it is. This is a creditor, right? Which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other 50. Right? So it's basically 10 to 1. However, the value of that money comes out in today's dollars and cents, just think of it as 10 to 1, right? Say one of them owed $1,000, one of them owed $10,000, or $10,000 and $100,000, however you want to look at it, right? One of them owed 10 times as much as the other one. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. So this is an interesting, now we could go for a long ways on whether that was a smart business idea or what the guy was trying to accomplish by forgiving. It doesn't matter, that because it's not the point of the story. The point of the story is there was an order of magnitude difference between the debt of one of them and the debt of another one. That's the point of the story. Okay, which of them will love him the most? So Simon thinks about it for a minute, and he says, well, I suppose that he to whom he forgave the most. And Jesus says, thou hast rightly judged. Now, I just want to take a moment to think about this today. In fact, I want us to spend most of the rest of this morning thinking our way through this. And I want to ask you whether you think, or what do you think Jesus is ultimately telling Simon here? What's the ultimate impact of this for Simon? And please don't forget to use the microphones, because we do have people online who are watching this and they'd like to hear your questions. And if it's not on, just click the little button and turn it on.
He's comparing it to the forgiveness of sins.
He is indeed comparing it to the forgiveness of sin. And that is in the end, the ultimate point for Simon about this forgiveness isn't money. Money is just the illustration here of debt. It's the forgiveness of sin. Good. Now, why the comparison? Yeah, it's on.
Jews and Gentiles, maybe?
So one idea might be Jews and Gentiles. Does that fit? Does it fit with Simon and this woman? Anybody have an idea? So I'm getting some head shaking like, I don't think so. It doesn't make as much sense because the woman isn't a Gentile. It could be, but it doesn't make sense. Because you're dealing with two Jews. She's Jewish, he's Jewish. So what does the comparison mean?
He obviously felt that his sins were little and that hers were great.
Yes, absolutely. He felt that his sins were little and hers were great. That is true. Let's keep going. Unravel this for me for a minute. Keep teasing it apart until we get the meanings out of it that Jesus has. Because he's using a very small thing to give a whole lot of meaning.
He was self-righteous and thought that he was above in stature and in purity than the woman, and so in his arrogance and pride.
Okay, so here's the thing that we're kind of seeing here, right? And on the surface, this is exactly the kind of the surface of what we're looking at. We see, because we understand something they did not at the time. We understand that if a man is angry at his brother without a cause, he's already committed murder in his heart. And if a man looks on a woman to lust after her, he's already committed adultery in his heart. But remember that all they had at this time was the Old Testament. So by that yardstick, Simon would measure himself and he would say, I am more righteous than she. She is more unrighteous than I am. And would he have been wrong? No, right. He would not have been wrong by that yardstick. So we could say that the point Jesus is trying to drive home here is, you're no better than she is. But that doesn't actually fit with the text. Jesus isn't asking him to notice that there's really no difference between owing $10 and owing $100. owing $1,000 and owing $10,000. In fact, he's magnifying that difference. He is pointing out that difference and saying, it did make a difference. Right? There's a part of us from where we stand that wants to look at both of them in the ultimate sense of good and evil, of righteousness and unrighteousness, and say, really, there was no difference between Simon and this woman. But Jesus didn't point it out as though there's no difference. He actually pointed out and said, there is a difference, Simon, between you and her. Why does he care about that difference? Why doesn't he? Anybody give me an idea why you think it is that Jesus doesn't try to convince Simon that he's just as bad as this woman? Have you ever tried to do that, by the way? Have you ever tried to convince someone that they're just as bad as Hitler? Whatever you want to pick as the ultimate evil. Have you noticed that happening in the media? Where what they want to do is they want to convince you that some other politician, someone who's not on their side of the issues, is as bad as Hitler. Did it work for you? Probably not. So why doesn't Jesus try to convince Simon that he's just as bad as this woman is? Because it's not the story he tells. He doesn't tell the story to say, look, I want you to understand, you're just as bad as she is, or even worse, because you're self-righteous. No, he didn't point that out. He pointed out clearly, there's a difference between you and her. And one reason for that is it doesn't work trying it the other way, right? Jesus is nowhere near going to do something that's completely useless, right? So we might try to convince somebody they're just as bad as someone else. But if you ever really dealt with somebody that way, you know what a losing battle that is from step one. It's just not getting you anywhere. So Jesus doesn't try it. Tries another tack. Points out the difference. Why? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello? Well, I think it's obvious to all of us humans that there is a difference. Like, there are people that are worse and are better. Like, it would be kind of silly to try and pretend that we're all the same. I know that we can all say we're all sinners, but there are levels of, there's a serial murderer and a person that steals a pencil is not on the same level. Like,
That's exactly right. I think we do a great disservice to the gospel when we don't acknowledge that there's a difference in these things. And we ought to acknowledge that. We ought to be able to look at it and say, I know, self-righteousness is an awful thing, and arrogance and pride are terrible sins. But really, there's a huge difference between the way some people sin and the way other people sin. And we do a great disservice to the gospel when we're not willing to acknowledge that difference. We ought to acknowledge that difference. And Jesus here acknowledges that difference. Says, you're not as bad as she is. You're absolutely right, Simon. The judgment you've made in your heart is exactly right. He even tells him, thou hast judged rightly. Right? You're not as bad as she is. You would be the debtor who owed 10 cents. She would be the debtor who owed $10. Or wherever you want to put that magnitude of difference on the scale. She's 10 times worse than you were. Right? Let's acknowledge it. Right? When we deal with children and the gospel, and we want children to be saved young. We want our children to be saved early. We want them to live a life where they don't walk off into really awful sin that can destroy mind and body and health, and everything else, right? We do not want them to live that life. So we want them to get saved early. We want to raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord so that they don't depart from the path of righteousness, and that can be done. Right? We do not have to have children run off in the world. They can actually grow up in the Lord, live in the Lord, die in the Lord. But we have to lead them to the Lord early. And there isn't a recipe that guarantees that all of them are going to be that way, because they're all unique, right? They're going to make choices, right? And we could try to teach them about choices and all that sort of stuff. I'm saying this because I just want parents to know, if you've managed to raise your children so that they live for the Lord and don't run off after the world, you have done a great thing. It's not a small thing. It's a great thing. And if you've raised your children for the Lord and you've done your dead level best, and you have some of them that wandered off in the world or chased after sin, this is not a condemnation to you. And this doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Remember, they're individual people and they're going to make choices too. But what we want is the opportunity for them to see the righteousness of the Lord, the goodness of the path of God, so that they'll stay on that path, right? And if they did, right, let's say you're one of those people, and you got saved early in life, and you didn't run around before you got married, and you chose your spouse well, and you didn't go out and try, sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all that sort of stuff, or whatever the worst sins are you can think of, or whatever the common sins are that you can think of. You avoided that. You hung out with the people of God. You chose your spouse well. You chose someone who would follow the Lord and help lead you in following the Lord, right? We lead each other as husband and wife at different times in different ways. And you want somebody who's going to constantly pull you back toward the Lord, draw you toward the Lord. And the two of you have been serving the Lord now for years, and you never went off and did those things. And then we look at somebody who is, a prostitute and child abuser and drug user and despises righteousness. And if we compared you to them, we'd say, you're better than they are. And that is exactly Jesus' point. But why is he making that point? I'm glad he did. But why is he making that point? Yes, sir. Yeah, it's on.
One,
Yeah.
2, 3. Yeah? No?
You're good.
Okay. I see the two different types of gratitude. One being the person who was saved from going into those things. His gratitude would be from that salvation of being spared, being the mercy of the Lord, keeping him on the straight and narrow rather than in the other. And on the other side, the gratitude is that God was so merciful that he even forgave me, who was in the worst of all that. And it's still a point of gratitude, but from a different perspective.
Okay, very good. Is this about gratitude, or what is it about? I think you're right, but I don't think the point here is gratitude. Because that wasn't what Jesus asked Simon. What did he ask him?
He asked him who would love him more.
Who would love him more? It's not about gratitude. It's about love. Now, that shouldn't surprise us, right? This shouldn't shock us. Because God is love. And we know love, not because we loved him first, but he loved us first. And God commendeth, he doesn't say he commendeth his mercy toward us. He says he commendeth his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So let's see if we can break this out to its essential element. The most essential element in this parable is Jesus is comparing loves. Does that make you happy? What does that make you think? How does that make you feel? I'm not asking as a psychologist. I'm asking you to look in your heart and let's see if we can look at it in another sense for a minute. Let's see if we can kind of bring it home. Right now in this room today, there are just so many of us. And God has the ability to line us up from the greatest love to Him to the least love for Him. In the same way that we would say we have to be able to acknowledge that there's a difference in iniquity, there's a difference in sinners, this passage is clearly saying God sees a difference in the way you love Him and the way I love Him and the way the person next to you loves Him. Now that ought to be an unsettling thought, right? Yes.
Yeah, I don't like that aspect.
I don't like that thought.
No, because then I was raised up in a Christian home. I have a few regrets, but not many, not compared to the people I've dealt with. And how is it that this verse is saying that I love him less than the other guy?
Yeah.
I love him because I got a blessing of a Christian family. I got the blessing of Christian teaching, and that has fostered my love for him without having to go through all that to be the greater lover.
Right? Yes. Grab the mic, yeah.
Okay, the thing I see is they have a difference in the way they express their love to Jesus. Where the righteous man might have loved God, but he showed it very superficially. Where the woman, I mean, like me, was saved from so much. Her love was more expressed so openly with humility, maybe. So a different type of love between the both of them. Expression of love, maybe.
Right. I would like that. That would comfort me. And here's why it would comfort me, because I know as individuals, we have, if you've ever read the 5 love language or looked at any of that kind of stuff, right? As individuals, we all have different ways of expressing our love. And we have different ways of receiving the expression of someone else's love, of appreciating the expression of someone else's love. And that may be true, but I don't think that's what he's saying here. Why not? Why would I say, I don't think that's what he's saying here? What is the measurement that he uses? Does he use a measurement of type or of magnitude? He uses a measurement of magnitude, of amount, not type. Yes.
It's done. There you go. I think it's really interesting, though, that in this whole passage, to throw a little bit of a wrench of it, his story almost surprises me. This
Yes,
is
it
what
does.
he pulled. Because like Nicodemus, let's say the Lord totally heard his thoughts. He's saying, he has no idea who this woman is. This teacher must not be a prophet. In my analysis of the situation, if I was I'd be like, he thinks that unclean women can't come to prophets. This is a false conception. But that's not what he addresses at all. He brings a whole nother story about debtors.
Yes.
And then he talks about love. And it is a form of magnitude. And it doesn't even say that either of them do anything. It just says who's going to love them most.
That's right.
And the answer, it must be the one who more was forgave. It doesn't say that either of them came and expressed it, showed how thankful they were to the one who forgave them. Clearly, the forgiver is equal. And you may even be able to argue that the forgiver loves the one who he forgave more. But in reality, neither of them can pay. Both of them had a debt. What he did was equal, as the loaner was forgive the debt.
Yes.
But the one to whom it was forgiven, he asked the question, who's going to love him most? I don't even know why that's the question you would ask. And he begs, it's well, who's going to love him most? And he's like, the one who more was forgave. And then it like really puts like this sting in the situation of like, well, are you going to love more? Because right now you're showing that you don't love me as much as she loves me. I think he's actually hitting him directly as not being as loving. And what he's hitting
Yes.
the source is because you don't think you were forgiven very much.
That's
I
right.
think he's actually addressing his specific situation.
That is exactly what he's doing. He is actually hitting Simon like right between the lobes of his heart, right? I mean, that thing hits dead on. He's saying, you really don't love me as much as she does. Because you haven't felt the need for forgiveness the way she has. Now, that ought to bring out a couple of interesting thoughts to us, it seems to me. The first one is that God notices the difference. And that makes me uncomfortable. I sort of don't want that. I sort of want to be able to love God on my terms, my way, and I want him to count whatever love I have as though it were great love. Now, I'm not sure I would count that. I'm not sure I want that same relationship with my wife. I don't want her to look at me and say, well, didn't I bake you cookies like 3 years ago? Like, isn't that enough? Like, what more do you want from me? Right? And my answer is everything, baby. That's what I want from you, everything. And what is it that God wants from our love to him? Everything. Absolutely every part of us, unreservedly offered over to him. That's what he wants. And nothing else is going to suffice. And anything else we try to make excuses as being equal. You've heard the old one before. I know it's a terrible old joke, right? When the woman says, do you really love me? And he says, hey, the day we got married, did I say I love you? Yes. Well, if something changes, I'll let you know. Right? Yeah, this is just not love. This is not much love. However much you feel in your heart is very different. In fact, right after this, thou hast rightly judged, Jesus goes on to explain to him and says, when I came in and sat down, you didn't so much as wash my feet. But since this woman came in, she hasn't done anything but pour out tears on me. That even takes it a step further. Because it makes it apparent that, Simon, the problem is, here's what you want to do. You want to look like you love me by paying for dinner. But you're not really invested in this relationship much. She is. Because she's actually humbling herself with tears and with demonstrations of her love for me, but you're not demonstrating anything for me. You're demonstrating for the rest of the world, but nothing for me. And how many of us would be that way? Well, Lord, look at all the money I gave. Well, Lord, look at this. It also seems to me kind of interesting that God has his own way of judging our love. And we're going to have to live up to his standard of it, not ours. But there's a third thing that we've hinted at and we've sort of talked about, but I really want to state it plainly. It ought to sort of it ought to be proportional, shouldn't it? If you feel like the Lord has really forgiven you for some really awful sins, shouldn't your love be proportional to that? Wouldn't it be awful if it wasn't? You know why Jesus chooses a creditor here? Because it seems preposterous that somebody who makes their living lending money will just forgive the people they've lent money to. It seems absolutely preposterous that it would work that way. And so he's trying to give this sense that says, This is such a difficult, unusual thing when God actually forgives people of their sins to Him. And we want it to be that it's sort of the normal course of events. The course of the events are like this. God is up there from sin. He has no need. He offers forgiveness freely to all. And so whatever sin debt you have, come to God and He'll just forgive it and you can go on with your life. But that is really misunderstanding forgiveness. And that's misunderstanding God. Because what He actually offers cost Him a lot. Like a creditor would forgive his debtors. Cost them a lot. So it ought to be proportional. There's another thing it ought to be. It ought to be noticeable. Right? We ought to be able to see that there's a real difference. In whose interest is it? And this should be an obvious question, right? In whose best interest is it for people not to notice the difference? Well, it isn't the Lord's, and it isn't yours, so that only leaves the devil. Which means he would do everything he can do to somehow persuade you that you don't really need to show a difference, or that you can't show a difference. And there's all sorts of tactics he'll use on it. Like, well, with the life I've lived, people don't need to be hearing from me in the open meeting. They need to hear from somebody who lived a better life than I lived. But that's exactly the opposite of what it ought to be. It ought to be that we who have been forgiven the most have the most to say about the one who forgave us. We aren't just, I get it when somebody says, look, I'm just a beggar trying to show other beggars where to go to find bread. I get it. I know what we're trying to say when we're saying that, but it's not that at all. Because I'm not a beggar. God's forgiveness didn't leave me begging. It removed all of that for me and made me His child, a child of His house. So, and with that childhood came all the rights of a child of that house. Even though yesterday I was his sworn enemy, today I am a child of his home with all the rights and blessings attendant thereunto, which means I ought to have a lot to say about the one who commended his love toward me, made me free. And if I don't, something's wrong. There ought to be a difference. We should be able to see it in one another. If we truly believe, now take it back to where we sort of started at. If we truly believe that there isn't that much difference between Simon and this woman, and we truly believe there isn't that much difference between me and the greatest sinner in the world, if we truly believe that, I'm not sure we do, right? I think we see the difference. But if I personally believe that my personal heart, my sin against God in my heart has actually been really awful, and my outward sins in my life have been also awful, shouldn't my love be proportional to that? Yeah. Shouldn't people be able to tell? I think people ought to be able to tell, and here's how I think I have the authority of Jesus on this. Because he points to the woman, and he points to Simon and says, when I came into your house, this is what happened. When she came into your house, this is what she did. I can show you her love. Imagine going to the Lord and saying, Lord, you know how much I love you. I don't have anything I can show you to prove it. But I really love you with all my heart. Then the answer of the Lord is, you got to show me. Wouldn't we want that from God? If he says, surely I've had mercy, surely I love you. You're not going to be able to see it until you die and go to heaven. There won't be any blessings in your life right now. I'm not going to answer your prayers. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm not going to comfort your heart. I'm not going to satisfy the longings of your soul. I'm not going to heal your body. I'm not going to do any of that. But trust me, I love you. You'll see it when you get to heaven. We'd be like, oh, something's wrong with that. But he doesn't do it that way. He actually says, my banner over you is love. And I walk with you in your heart. And I comfort your soul in times of distress. And I'm your strong tower you run into in times of trouble. And when you look back over your life, you will see all the times that I have rescued you. And I have blessed you when others have fallen by your side. You stood strong because I was there. I was your shield and your buckler. I've proven my love to you. It also infers to me that he's sort of wanting to see the difference now. Not like someday I hope I can see a difference. Wait till you get here and we finally in the bride of Christ, and wait till then I'm really going to experience your love for me. No, it ought to be now. And if we're not showing the love of God, well, can I say it ought to flow naturally from the Holy Spirit? Think of how he says it in 2 Timothy 1:7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Right? Because not only should it be like proportional to the forgiveness I've received, which means the longer I live, the more I should be demonstrating my love for God. Right? Not just feeling my love for God in secret in my heart. Because somebody who feels love for you secretly in their heart, you would question, do they really love you, or is this like a stalker? Right? What's really going on here, right? It's when somebody actually shows you their love for you. By the way, this is a complete side note. I'm going to throw this in there just because we need a place to attach this thought to. But I think you'll find that this attaches really well. When Paul writes to the Corinthians, they ask him about marriage. Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he says this. And I'm going to take all of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I'm going to kind of rearrange a little bit of it and hand it to you in very short form. But here's essentially what he says. You as a husband ought to demonstrate your love for your wife by doing things that are inconvenient for you, but convenient for her. And you as a wife ought to show your love for your husband by doing things for him that might be inconvenient for you, but they're very convenient for him. And if you don't do this, you're defrauding each other. Now, there's many ways that, in fact, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard preachers preach giving from Malachi. You're stealing from God. putting your money in a bag full of holes because you're not giving your money in the offering. Well, I do think money is part of that measurement of your love for God, because where your heart is, or where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And money is clearly a treasure. And if we're not willing to give of that, what do we have? What are we saying? Saying, I've got this part of my heart that doesn't belong to you? That doesn't make sense. So we ought to become givers because, not because somebody's threatening or because we're stealing from God, but really because it's the expression of our love. But withholding your love is the issue. Withholding your love is stealing from the one who actually loves you the most. You steal from your wife, defraud her, which is even worse. How is it worse? Because you said on that day you got married, I'm all yours. For better or for worse. Now you're holding back and saying, I'm all yours, but not that. Well, then you're not all mine. You signed a contract saying one thing, and now you're saying there's secret writing on the back of the contract that you didn't read, and so all of me isn't yours. Well, that's defrauding. We can defraud each other as husband and wife. But worse yet, we can defraud God. Because when we repented and came to Him in salvation, we gave Him our heart and soul. And it ought to flow naturally from that. Downhill, like water flows downhill. That we become filled with the Holy Spirit. Sins are forgiven. Blessings are given. Comfort is handed to us. And therefore, our love ought to increase over time. I ought to be able to show people next year that I loved God more this year than I did last year. I ought to be able to show God that. People should notice it. I don't have to go around telling you, let me tell you how much I love Linda. I do not have to tell you that. You should be able to see us together and say, wow, look how much he loves her. And if you saw us together and you didn't see us that way, then you would be thinking something's wrong in that marriage. And you wouldn't even have to know much about it. So if we look at you right now in your relationship, would we think there's something wrong with that? They're not. They don't really love God. Let's see. Did I skip one here? There we are. Change. One of the things we learn in Revelations 2 and 3 is that love is not automatic. It cannot become habitual. It does not become any of those things. It can grow stale and cold. And we can leave our first love. And our love can change. It could have been very sweet love at one time. And over time, it can become less sweet for both us and the Lord. And that's a shame when that happens. Because in other words, it's like running a race. You can find yourself in first place, think you're doing fine, set your pace and don't change it, and end up in fourth place. Why? Because everything else changed. You weren't the winner anymore. You didn't love the most. Now, I'm not saying God is sitting in heaven handing out prizes for who's got the greatest love for Him. But I am saying He notices the difference. And His desire, His expressed desire, is that we would love Him with our whole heart and our full mind and all of our strength. And if we're not that, then what's going on? What could be wrong? What could be wrong with your love for God? Anybody got an idea? I don't want to admit it either. So whatever you say, everybody else is going to say, yeah, amen. Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I got that one. So don't just sit quiet. What could be wrong?
It's inconstant. It's inconstant.
It's inconstant. Why would my love for God be inconstant? Why would it fluctuate? Up and down and up and down. Okay, yeah, I get it. We're humans. Human and inconstant are pretty much synonyms, don't you think so? Right? We're not really constant at anything. Even the habits that we have, we're not even good at keeping our own habits. Even the bad ones we're not great at keeping. What else? Anybody want to say it? Come on, it hurts, I know.
Sin separates us from
Sin
God.
separates us, but sin separates us from the love of God from His side. What about my side? Well, yeah, it makes my heart grow cold. But there's a reason that we don't want to admit. What did He say to Simon? Why did she love more?
I think the biggest problem is when I look at it, my love does not match the debt that was forgiven me.
That's right. The problem isn't on God's side. And the problem isn't necessarily some overt sin. The problem is I'm a lousy accountant. I don't do a good job of actually seeing because I don't want to. It doesn't suit me to admit how great my sin was or is. That's why people don't want to get saved. Because the first step to getting saved isn't asking Jesus into your heart. Somewhere in there, you've got to be willing to look at your sin and admit you failed miserably and you have no hope unless somebody saves you. And that's hard. I don't want to admit my own sin. I don't want to look at how much God has forgiven me. I don't want to take tally of it. I don't want to look back at the last week, let alone 58 years, and ask and really think about the real depths of my sin. That's depressing. That's an ugly picture. I want to see myself in the mirror and I want to be able to adjust the LEDs to get the right tone so my skin doesn't look all blotchy and gnarly in the mirror. And I want the guy in the mirror to look kind of okay. I'll find fault with him, but I don't want to find that much fault. That's the real problem. The real problem is if we were really good accountants, we would look at the sin we've been forgiven of and we would index our love to match that. And we wouldn't be satisfied until we were certain that we had at least indexed our love to our iniquity. We'd go on a hunt for it. Lord, have I loved you yet in proportion to the forgiveness I've received from you? No, okay. I want to spend some more time with you. I want to do some more things for you. I want to feel your love for people even more because I want to love you in proportion to how you've forgiven me. And we wouldn't be satisfied till we got that job done. But I don't want to look at it that way. And there's a problem with that. Because if you ask, what was that really about? It was really about getting Simon to look at that. And I think it was successful. Question is, will it be successful with us? Let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the time we've had to be together today, and I ask you to bless us as we think through this in our lives. We ask that our love for you